The classroom buzzed with the low hum of whispers and the occasional burst of laughter. It was mid-morning, and the students of Mr. Davidson's history class were seated in neat rows, their notebooks open and pens poised. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the room, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. At the back of the classroom sat Liam, a quiet boy with tousled brown hair and an awkward slouch. His eyes flitted nervously across the room, avoiding direct contact with anyone. He was new to the school, and though it had only been a few weeks, he had already begun to dread coming to class. Liam was autistic, though he rarely talked about it. His parents had taught him to embrace his differences, but he was well aware that the world didn't always understand or accept people like him. This school was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where he could thrive. But so far, all it had been was a test of his resilience. At the front of the class, Mr. Davidson leaned against his desk, arms crossed and a smirk on his face. He was the kind of teacher who thrived on authority, his booming voice and sharp wit making him both feared and admired by his students. To him, respect was earned through discipline and obedience, and he had little patience for those who didn't fit his mold. "All right, class," he began, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's talk about today's assignment. You were supposed to prepare a presentation on an influential historical figure. Who's ready to go first?" The room fell silent. Students avoided his gaze, sinking into their seats to escape being called on. Mr. Davidson's smirk widened. He loved these moments of power, the way the students squirmed under his scrutiny. His eyes landed on Liam, who was staring down at his desk, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his notebook. "Liam," Mr. Davidson said, his tone dripping with faux encouragement. "Why don't you go first? Show us what you've got." Liam's head shot up, his face pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The other students turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and pity. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. I'm not ready," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Davidson raised an eyebrow, his smirk turning into a sneer. "Not ready," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Well, that's disappointing. Did you not understand the assignment? Or is this just too much for you?" A few students chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Liam's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He wanted to disappear, to melt into his seat and never be seen again. "I'll do it tomorrow," Liam said, his voice shaking. "I just need more time." Mr. Davidson sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "More time," he repeated, his tone exaggerated. "All right, class, you heard him. Liam needs more time. Maybe tomorrow he'll be ready to grace us with his brilliance." The class erupted into quiet snickers. Liam's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. He clenched his fists under the desk, willing himself to stay calm. Mr. Davidson wasn't done. "You know, Liam," he said, his voice cutting through the laughter, "life isn't always going to give you extra time. Out in the real world, no one cares about your excuses. They care about results. Maybe it's time you learned that." The words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. He wanted to yell, to tell Mr. Davidson how unfair and cruel he was being. But he couldn't find the words. Instead, he sat silently, his head bowed, his mind racing with thoughts of anger and humiliation. What Mr. Davidson didn't know, what none of the students knew, was that Liam's father was one of the wealthiest men in the city. And not just wealthy, but the owner of the very school they were sitting in. Liam had begged his parents not to make a big deal of it, to let him attend like a normal student without the weight of his family's name hanging over him. They had agreed on one condition: if he ever felt truly unsafe or mistreated, he had to tell them. For the first time, Liam was beginning to think it was time to call his dad. The rest of the class dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity for Liam. Mr. Davidson moved on to other students, but the sting of his words lingered. Liam could feel the occasional glances from his classmates, some sympathetic, others amused. He kept his eyes on his notebook, scribbling mindless doodles just to keep his hands busy. When the bell finally rang, Liam shoved his books into his bag and hurried out of the classroom, keeping his head down. He could hear the muffled laughter and chatter of his peers as they filed out behind him. His chest felt tight, his breaths shallow, as he made his way to the quietest corner of the school courtyard. There, beneath a large oak tree, Liam pulled out his phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through his contacts, hovering over his dad's number. He hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always wanted to handle things on his own, to prove that he didn't need his father's influence to navigate life. But today, something had shifted. Today, he felt like he had no other choice. He tapped the number and held the phone to his ear. It rang twice before a familiar, deep voice answered. "Liam? Is everything okay?" Liam hesitated, his throat tightening. "Dad," he said finally, his voice shaky, "I need to tell you something." Later that day, Mr. Davidson was in the teacher's lounge, sipping his coffee and flipping through a stack of assignments. He was feeling particularly pleased with himself. That morning's lesson had gone exactly as he liked. He'd asserted his authority, kept the class in check, and reminded them who was in charge. If a little tough love was what it took to keep them in line, so be it. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the lounge door opening. He glanced up to see the school principal, Mrs. Aldridge, stepping in. Her expression was serious, her normally soft demeanor replaced by a sharp edge. "Mr. Davidson," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to see you in my office." "Now." Mr. Davidson blinked, caught off guard. "Is something wrong?" he asked, setting down his coffee. "Let's talk in my office," Mrs. Aldridge replied, already turning on her heel and heading out the door. Curiosity and annoyance warred within him as he followed her down the hallway. What could this be about? He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. If anything, he thought he deserved praise for his teaching methods, not a summons to the principal's office. When they reached her office, Mrs. Aldridge held the door open and gestured for him to enter. He stepped inside, his confidence faltering slightly when he saw who was waiting for them. Sitting in one of the chairs was a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit. His presence filled the room, and his piercing gaze landed on Mr. Davidson with unsettling intensity. Behind him stood a woman with a clipboard, her expression unreadable but professional. Mr. Davidson recognized the man immediately. It was Charles Bennett, the owner of the school. He had seen his name on countless emails and newsletters but had never expected to meet him in person, certainly not under these circumstances. "Mr. Bennett," Mr. Davidson said, forcing a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Mr. Bennett didn't return the smile. Instead, he gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit," he said simply. Mr. Davidson's smile faltered further, but he complied, sinking into the chair as Mrs. Aldridge took her place behind her desk. The room was thick with tension, and Mr. Davidson could feel his confidence slipping away. "I assume you know who I am," Mr. Bennett began, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous undertone. "Yes, of course," Mr. Davidson replied quickly. "You're the owner of the school." "That's correct," Mr. Bennett said. "And I'm also Liam Bennett's father." The blood drained from Mr. Davidson's face. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Mr. Bennett leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving Mr. Davidson. "Liam came home today very upset," he continued. "He told me about the way you spoke to him in class. About how you mocked him in front of his peers." "Mr. Bennett, Mr. Davidson began, but Mr. Bennett cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Let me be clear," Mr. Bennett said, his tone cold. "I will not tolerate any teacher in my school belittling a student, especially one with the courage to face the challenges my son faces every day. You crossed a line, Mr. Davidson. And now we're going to address it?" Mr. Davidson swallowed hard, his palms sweating. "Sir, I wasn't mocking him," he said, his voice shaky. "I was trying to motivate him. Some students need a little push to reach their potential." "Motivate?" Mr. Bennett repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "You call singling him out and humiliating him in front of his classmates motivation?" Mr. Davidson looked down, unable to meet Mr. Bennett's gaze. "I didn't realize," he began, but his voice trailed off. "You didn't realize," Mr. Bennett said, leaning back in his chair. "That's your defense? You didn't realize my son is autistic? You didn't realize the impact your words might have on him?" Mr. Davidson's silence spoke volumes. Mr. Bennett turned to Mrs. Aldridge. "What's the school's policy on incidents like this?" he asked. Mrs. Aldridge hesitated for a moment before replying, "We take all complaints of misconduct seriously. This will require a formal review." "Good," Mr. Bennet said. "I expect that review to be thorough. And I want Mr. Davidson suspended while it takes place." Mr. Davidson's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. "Suspended," he repeated. "But This isn't up for debate," Mr. Bennet said, cutting him off. "You have a responsibility to support and uplift your students, not tear them down. If you can't handle that responsibility, you don't belong in a classroom." Mr. Davidson slumped in his chair, his confidence completely shattered. He had spent years building his reputation as a strict but effective teacher, but in a single moment, it was all unraveling. "Liam deserves better," Mr. Bennet said, his voice softening slightly. "Every student in this school deserves better." Mr. Davidson sat in stunned silence as Mr. Bennet's words echoed in his ears. The weight of the accusations, combined with the certainty in Mr. Bennet's tone, left no room for argument. The once confident teacher, who had prided himself on being the authority in his classroom, now felt small, exposed. Mrs. Aldridge cleared her throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Mr. Davidson," she began, her tone measured, "I'll have HR prepare the paperwork for your suspension. You'll be informed of the review process within the next 24 hours. In the meantime, I suggest you reflect on this matter." Mr. Davidson opened his mouth as if to protest, but the look on Mr. Bennet's face stopped him. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment, and somehow, that was worse. He nodded mutely, rising from his chair. "I'll await further instructions," he mumbled, avoiding everyone's gaze as he left the room. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Aldridge alone. Mr. Bennet leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, but his expression remained serious. "Thank you for acting swiftly on this," he said, addressing Mrs. Aldridge. "This school has always prided itself on inclusivity and excellence. Incidents like this cannot go unaddressed." Mrs. Aldridge nodded. "Of course, Mr. Bennet. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously. I'll also make arrangements to provide Liam with additional support in the classroom. He's a bright student, and I want to make sure he feels safe and valued here." Mr. Bennet's expression softened at the mention of his son. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." Later that evening, Liam sat on the living room couch, his knees pulled to his chest as he doodled absent-mindedly in a notebook. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of the refrigerator. He wasn't sure how he felt about the events of the day. Part of him was relieved that his father had stepped in, but another part of him worried about what might happen next. The sound of footsteps broke his train of thought. He looked up to see his dad entering the room, a small smile on his face. "Hey, champ," Mr. Bennet said, sitting down beside him. "How are you holding up?" Liam shrugged, his pencil hovering over the page. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I didn't know what else to do." Mr. Bennet placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip gentle but firm. "You did the right thing," he said. "What Mr. Davidson did was wrong, and he needed to be held accountable. No one should ever make you feel less than you are, Liam." Liam nodded slowly, his gaze dropping back to his notebook. "Do you think he hates me now? Because I got him in trouble?" Mr. Bennet frowned, his heart aching at the question. "Liam, this isn't your fault," he said firmly. "If Mr. Davidson feels anything, it should be regret for how he treated you. You didn't do anything wrong by standing up for yourself." Liam's lips twitched into a small smile. "Thanks, Dad." Mr. Bennet ruffled his hair. "Anytime, kiddo. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." The following week, the school buzzed with rumors about Mr. Davidson's sudden absence. The students speculated wildly, their theories ranging from an extended vacation to a disciplinary action. Liam, meanwhile, kept his head down, focusing on his studies and avoiding the whispers. It wasn't until Friday morning that Mrs. Aldridge addressed the situation during the school assembly. Standing on the stage before the entire student body, she spoke with authority and compassion. "As many of you may have noticed, Mr. Davidson is currently on leave," she began. This is due to an ongoing review of his conduct. I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone of the values this school stands for: respect, inclusivity, and kindness. No one, student or staff, is exempt from upholding these values. Her words hung in the air, the weight of their meaning sinking in. Liam, seated in the middle of the auditorium, felt a swell of emotion. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, heard, and protected. 1 month later, Liam's classroom had a new teacher, a kind woman named Ms. Harper who brought a fresh energy to the class. She made an effort to connect with every student, encouraging them to share their thoughts and ideas without fear of judgment. For Liam, it was a breath of fresh air. One afternoon, after class had ended, Ms. Harper approached Liam as he packed his bag. "Liam," she said, her voice gentle, "I just wanted to say that I'm really impressed with your work. You have a unique way of looking at things, and I think that's a gift." Liam looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Really? Really?" she said with a smile. "Don't ever be afraid to share your perspective. The world needs more people like you." As Liam walked home that day, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The shadows of Mr. Davidson's harsh words had begun to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. At home, he shared the news with his dad, who listened with pride. Together, they sat at the kitchen table, planning ways to support other students like Liam, those who just needed a little understanding and encouragement to shine. And for the first time, Liam realized that his voice mattered. Not just to his family, but to the world around him. 6 months later, the school had undergone subtle but meaningful changes in the months following the incident with Mr. Davidson. Inspired by Liam's courage, the administration had implemented new policies aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding. Teachers participated in workshops about neurodiversity, bullying, and effective communication, while students were encouraged to engage in peer-led discussions about respect and kindness. For Liam, life at school was better than ever. He was thriving in Ms. Harper's class, where his unique perspectives were celebrated rather than mocked. He had even joined the school's creative writing club, where he found an outlet for his ideas and stories. His confidence had grown steadily, and with it, his sense of belonging. One day, after a particularly engaging writing club session, Liam stayed behind to organize his notes. As he packed up, Ms. Harper entered the room, a warm smile on her face. "Liam," she said, walking over to him, "I just got word about a school-wide essay competition. The theme is overcoming challenges, and I think you'd be perfect for it." Liam blinked in surprise. "Me? You really think I should enter?" "I do," Ms. Harper said firmly. "You have a story to tell, Liam, and I think it could inspire a lot of people." Liam hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "But I'll give it a shot." Over the next few weeks, Liam poured his heart into his essay, reflecting on his experiences at the school. He wrote about the challenges of being autistic, the sting of judgment, and the strength it took to stand up for himself. But more importantly, he wrote about the people who had believed in him, his father, Ms. Harper, and even his peers, who had begun to see him not as someone to pity but as someone to admire. When he submitted the essay, Liam felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time, he felt proud of his voice and the story he had to share. The day of the awards assembly arrived, and the entire school gathered in the auditorium. Students and teachers alike buzzed with anticipation as the principal took the stage to announce the winners. "And now," Mrs. Aldridge said, her voice ringing through the room, "the winner of this year's essay competition is Liam Bennett." The room erupted into applause as Liam sat frozen in his seat, disbelief washing over him. Amanda, one of his few close friends, nudged him with a grin. "Go on, Liam. You earned it." Liam stood shakily, making his way to the stage. As he approached the microphone, he could see his father in the crowd, beaming with pride. The principal handed him a certificate and a small trophy before stepping aside to let him speak. Taking a deep breath, Liam faced the audience. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "When I came to this school, I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel like I belonged. But over the past few months, I've learned that being different doesn't make you less, it makes you unique. And sometimes, The challenges we face are the very things that make us stronger. The room fell silent, every word sinking in. I want to thank my dad, Liam continued, his voice thick with emotion, for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And I want to thank the teachers and friends who've shown me that kindness and understanding can make all the difference. When he finished, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Liam felt a swell of pride unlike anything he'd ever experienced. For the first time, he wasn't just the quiet boy at the back of the class. He was someone worth listening to. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the other side of town, Mr. Davidson sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers. Since his suspension, he had been attending mandated training sessions on inclusivity and emotional intelligence. At first, he had resisted, viewing the process as nothing more than a punishment. But over time, something had shifted. Reading Liam's essay, which had been shared with the school community, Mr. Davidson felt a pang of guilt. His words, once meant to assert his authority, now seemed cruel and thoughtless. He realized how deeply he had failed not only Liam but himself as an educator. Determined to change, Mr. Davidson applied for a new teaching position at a school that specialized in working with neurodiverse students. It was a steep learning curve, but he embraced the challenge, driven by a newfound desire to make amends. Liam's story became a catalyst for lasting change, both at the school and beyond. His essay was published in the local newspaper, sparking conversations about neurodiversity and inclusion in education. Parents, students, and teachers alike rallied around the message, pushing for broader reforms. Years later, Liam would look back on those difficult months with a sense of gratitude. The hardships had shaped him, but they hadn't defined him. They had given him a voice, a purpose, and a chance to show the world that every person, no matter their challenges, deserves respect and dignity. And in a small classroom miles away, a humbled Mr. Davidson would tell his new students about a boy named Liam Bennett who had taught him the most important lesson of all. True strength lies in understanding and compassion. 5 years later, the school's annual alumni event was in full swing, the hall adorned with banners celebrating its many accomplished graduates. Teachers and students mingled, sharing memories and catching up on the years gone by. Among the crowd was Liam, now 19, standing taller and more confident than ever. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and a warm smile, his energy drawing people to him effortlessly. Liam was no longer the quiet boy who hid in the back of the classroom. He had gone on to become a passionate advocate for neurodiversity, speaking at conferences and writing articles that had gained national attention. His essay, the one that had won the school competition years ago, had been republished in educational journals and even cited in discussions about reforming classroom practices. At the event, Liam was approached by Ms. Harper, who now served as the school's vice principal. She beamed as she shook his hand. "Liam, it's so good to see you," she said. "I heard about your latest project. Supporting neurodiverse students through mentorship, what an incredible idea." Liam nodded. "Thanks, Ms. Harper. I just want to give kids like me the tools to succeed, no matter what challenges they face." As they spoke, a familiar figure entered the hall. Mr. Davidson, looking older but no less dignified, scanned the room with a tentative expression. He had been invited as part of the event's theme, the power of growth and second chances. Spotting Liam, Mr. Davidson hesitated, then slowly made his way toward him. Ms. Harper noticed and gently excused herself, leaving Liam to face his former teacher. "Liam," Mr. Davidson began, his voice softer than Liam remembered. "It's been a long time." Liam looked at him, surprised but not unkind. "Mr. Davidson," he said, "it has..." There was a brief, awkward silence before Mr. Davidson spoke again. "I've been following your work. It's remarkable. Truly. You've become someone I never had the wisdom to see back then." Liam tilted his head, studying the man who had once been the source of so much pain. Mr. Davidson's posture was different, less rigid, more vulnerable. "I owe you an apology," Mr. Davidson continued. "Not just for what I said that day, but for failing to see the potential in you and so many others. I've spent the last few years trying to make amends for that, and I can only hope it's been enough." Liam nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate that," he said. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong. And I'm glad you've been working to change. Mr. Davidson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you. It means more than you know. For a moment, they stood in silence, the noise of the event swirling around them. Then Liam extended his hand. Mr. Davidson took it, his grip firm but humble. People can change, Liam said simply. As long as they're willing to learn. As the years went by, Liam's influence only grew. He founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting neurodiverse students, offering resources, mentorship, and advocacy to schools across the country. His work inspired countless individuals, showing them that difference wasn't a weakness but a strength. Meanwhile, Mr. Davidson continued teaching, this time in a school where his patience and understanding made him a beloved figure among students and staff. He often shared his story about Liam, using it as a lesson in humility and the importance of seeing the potential in every student. Their paths crossed occasionally at events and conferences, where they would exchange warm smiles and brief conversations. Their shared history, once a source of pain, had become a testament to growth, forgiveness, and the power of understanding. And though their lives took different directions, one truth remained constant. The lesson they had learned from each other rippled outward, touching countless lives and proving that even the most difficult moments can lead to extraordinary change. 10 years later, the sun shone brightly over a bustling city square where a large stage had been set up for a special event. Banners hung overhead with the words, "Celebrating Neurodiversity, a decade of advocacy and achievement." The crowd was filled with students, parents, educators, and supporters who had gathered to celebrate the impact of Liam's nonprofit organization, New Horizons for Neurodiversity, which had now expanded to over 20 countries. On the stage stood Liam, now 24, radiating confidence as he prepared to deliver the keynote speech. He looked out at the crowd, feeling both humbled and invigorated. This was more than just an event. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for and the lives he had touched along the way. He adjusted the microphone and smiled warmly. 10 years ago, he began, I was a shy, awkward kid sitting at the back of a classroom, unsure of where I fit in the world. I never imagined that I'd be standing here today, surrounded by so many incredible people who believe in the power of inclusion and understanding. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Liam waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Back then, I thought my differences were something to hide, he said. I thought they made me less. But I've learned that what makes us different is also what makes us extraordinary. And when we embrace those differences, when we celebrate them, we unlock a potential that can change the world. He paused, his gaze scanning the faces in the crowd. I didn't get here alone, he said. I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. My dad, who taught me to stand up for who I am. Teachers like Ms. Harper, who showed me that my voice matters. And even those who doubted me, because they pushed me to prove them wrong. The audience cheered again, and Liam smiled. The work we've done through New Horizons for Neurodiversity is just the beginning, he said. Together, we've created spaces where students can thrive, where teachers are equipped to support them, and where communities see the value in every individual. But there's still more to do. And I know that together, we can create a world where no one is left behind. As he finished, the crowd gave him a standing ovation. Liam stepped back from the microphone, his heart swelling with gratitude. He caught sight of his father in the front row, his face beaming with pride. Nearby, Ms. Harper wiped a tear from her eye, clapping enthusiastically. But one face in the crowd stood out the most. It was Mr. Davidson, now retired but still deeply involved in education reform. He had traveled across the country to attend the event, determined to show his support for the boy he had once underestimated. When Liam's eyes met his, Mr. Davidson gave him a small, respectful nod. After the event, Liam mingled with the attendees, shaking hands and taking photos. Toward the end of the evening, he found himself sitting on a bench in the square, enjoying a rare moment of peace. The sounds of the crowd faded into the background as he reflected on how far he had come. Mind if I join you? A familiar voice asked. Liam looked up to see Mr. Davidson standing nearby, his expression kind but hesitant. Liam gestured to the empty space beside him. Of course, The two sat in silence for a moment, watching the crowd. Finally, Mr. Davidson spoke. "Liam, I wanted to say how proud I am of you. What you've accomplished is extraordinary." "Thank you," Liam said, his tone genuine. "That means a lot coming from you." Mr. Davidson nodded, his gaze distant. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about the past," he admitted. "About the mistakes I made and the harm I caused. I can't change what I did, but I've tried to use those lessons to make a difference." "You have," Liam said, his voice steady. "I've seen the work you've done with students. It matters." Mr. Davidson smiled faintly. "You taught me that. You showed me that everyone has something valuable to offer, even if it takes time to see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their shared history replaced by a sense of mutual respect. Finally, Mr. Davidson stood, extending a hand. "Thank you, Liam," he said. "For everything." Liam shook his hand, his grip firm. "And thank you, Mr. Davidson, for listening and for growing." As Mr. Davidson walked away, Liam felt a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. The boy he had once been, the one who had sat at the back of the classroom, unsure of his place, was gone. In his place stood a man who had not only found his voice but had used it to change the world. Years later, Liam's story continued to inspire others. His nonprofit grew into a global movement, transforming education systems and creating opportunities for millions of neurodiverse individuals. Schools around the world adopted inclusive practices modeled after New Horizons for Neurodiversity, ensuring that every student, regardless of their challenges, could thrive. And in classrooms everywhere, teachers shared Liam's story with their students, a story about a boy who faced adversity, found his voice, and proved that even the smallest spark of kindness and understanding could ignite a revolution. Because in the end, Liam's journey wasn't just about overcoming challenges. It was about showing the world what's possible when we choose to see the best in one another. 20 years later, the annual New Horizons for Neurodiversity Gala was underway, hosted in a grand convention center filled with educators, policymakers, advocates, and families who had benefited from its programs. The evening was a celebration of progress and perseverance, a testament to the movement Liam had spearheaded. Liam, now in his early 40s, stood at the entrance, greeting attendees as they arrived. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples, but his energy and passion were as vibrant as ever. Beside him was his wife, Maria, who had been his unwavering partner in life and in his work. Their two children, Emma and Daniel, both teenagers, flitted between tables, helping with last-minute preparations. As the evening's main event began, Liam took to the stage, the applause from the audience washing over him like a warm wave. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom had been part of his journey from the beginning. "Good evening, everyone," Liam began, his voice steady and heartfelt. "It's hard to believe it's been 2 decades since New Horizons for Neurodiversity began as an idea scribbled in a notebook. What started as a dream has grown into a movement driven by all of you." The audience clapped enthusiastically, their admiration evident. "When we first started," Liam continued, "our goal was simple: to create a world where every student, regardless of their challenges, could thrive. Today, that vision has become a reality in ways I never imagined. But this work has never been about me. It's about the students, the families, and the educators who believed in something bigger than themselves." Liam paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Tonight, I want to share a story about someone who taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. Many of you know the broad strokes of my journey, but there's one part one don't share often." The audience leaned in, captivated. "When I was a student, there was a teacher who didn't understand me," Liam said, his tone reflective. "At the time, I thought he was my enemy, someone who wanted to silence my voice. But as I grew older, I realized that people can change. That same teacher eventually became one of my greatest supporters, and his willingness to learn and grow taught me the power of second chances." Liam smiled faintly. "That teacher is here with us tonight." A murmur rippled through the audience as Mr. Davidson, now in his 70s, rose from his seat near the front of the room. The applause was thunderous as he made his way to the stage, his face a mixture of humility and pride. Liam extended a hand to help him up the steps, then turned back to the audience. "Mr. Davidson represents what this movement is all about," he said. "It's not just about creating opportunities for students, it's about fostering understanding, compassion, and growth in all of us. Because when we work together, when we truly see each other, we can change the world." Mr. Davidson stood beside Liam, visibly moved. He took the microphone, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "I don't deserve this recognition," he said, "but I'm deeply honored to be part of this incredible journey. Liam taught me more than I ever taught him, and I'll always be grateful for the lessons he shared, not just about neurodiversity, but about humanity." The audience rose to their feet, the applause a thunderous affirmation of the shared journey between teacher and student. By the time the gala ended, Liam had spoken with dozens of attendees, each sharing stories of how New Horizons for neurodiversity had changed their lives. From parents who had found support for their children to educators who had learned to embrace new teaching methods, the testimonials reinforced the enduring impact of the movement. As Liam and his family prepared to leave, his daughter, Emma, tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," she said, her voice filled with awe, "did you really change Mr. Davidson's life?" Liam smiled down at her, his heart swelling with pride. "We changed each other's lives," he said. "That's the thing about growth. It's never one-sided." Years turned into decades, and Liam's work continued to ripple outward. His children carried on his legacy, becoming advocates in their own right. Emma became a teacher, inspired by her father's story, while Daniel pursued a career in policy, determined to make systemic changes in education. As Liam entered his later years, he often reflected on the journey that had brought him to where he was. He thought about the boy he had been, sitting at the back of the classroom, and the man he had become, standing on stages and speaking to the world. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the people who had supported him, and the lessons he had learned. And he thought about Mr. Davidson, whose willingness to change had been a reminder that no one was beyond redemption. In the end, Liam's story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about the connections we make, the lives we touch, and the belief that everyone, regardless of their challenges, has the power to make a difference. Because in the end, the greatest legacy isn't one of wealth or fame. It's the impact we leave behind in the hearts and minds of others. And Liam's legacy was one that would endure for generations. Long after Liam's time, the seeds he had planted continued to flourish. Schools worldwide embraced the principles of inclusivity and understanding that Liam had championed. Educators referred to his methods as the Bennett model, a framework for creating classrooms where neurodiverse students could thrive without fear of judgment. Liam's children, Emma and Daniel, carried his torch proudly. Emma, as a teacher, transformed her school into a shining example of inclusion, earning recognition from governments and organizations for her dedication. Daniel, as a policymaker, spearheaded legislation that funded special education programs and mandated training for teachers in neurodiversity awareness. One day, Emma stood before her own classroom of eager students. She glanced around at their curious faces, pausing at one student, a young boy who reminded her of her father. He was quiet, often lost in his thoughts, and struggled to keep up with the pace of the class. But Emma saw the potential in his eyes. "Liam," she called gently, smiling as the boy perked up. "Would you like to share your project with the class?" The boy hesitated but slowly nodded. He walked to the front of the room, clutching a handmade poster about planets. His voice wavered at first, but as he spoke, his confidence grew. By the time he finished, the class erupted into applause. Emma crouched beside him as he returned to his seat. "You did an amazing job, Liam," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." The boy beamed, and in that moment, Emma felt the same spark her father had ignited decades ago. A belief that every child deserved to feel valued and seen. Years after Liam's passing, his life and work were immortalized through the Bennett Legacy Foundation. The foundation continued to fund programs that supported neurodiverse individuals, offering scholarships, grants, and resources to communities across the globe. Its mission was simple yet profound: to create a world where no one felt excluded or overlooked. At the foundation's headquarters, a wall bore Liam's most famous quote, etched in bold letters. "What makes us different is what makes us extraordinary." When we embrace those differences, we unlock a world of limitless potential. Visitors from all walks of life came to the foundation, seeking inspiration and guidance. Many of them left with renewed hope, determined to carry Liam's vision into their own communities. Generations passed, but Liam's story endured. His journey was taught in schools, shared in lectures, and remembered in countless hearts. Educators, parents, and students alike spoke of the boy who had turned adversity into opportunity, who had taught the world to see the value in every individual. In a quiet corner of a future city, a statue of Liam stood in a bustling park. It depicted him as he had been in his prime, confident, compassionate, and determined. Around the base of the statue, children played, their laughter filling the air. One child, a curious girl, tugged at her father's sleeve as they walked by the statue. "Who was he?" she asked, pointing at the plaque. Her father knelt beside her, reading the inscription aloud. "Liam Bennett, advocate, leader, and a voice for those who were once unheard. He changed the way we see the world." The girl tilted her head thoughtfully. "What did he do?" "He showed us," her father said with a smile, "that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, and that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference." As they walked away, the girl looked back at the statue, her imagination sparked by the story of the boy who had grown into a man who changed the world. Liam's life became a reminder of a timeless truth, that every act of understanding, every choice to lift someone up instead of tearing them down, creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. His legacy wasn't just about the programs he built or the speeches he gave. It was about the lives he touched, the hearts he opened, and the belief that no matter our challenges, we all have the power to make a difference. And so, Liam's story lived on, not just as history but as a beacon for the future, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the boundless potential of the human spirit. As Liam approached his twilight years, he found himself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought him here. From the quiet boy in the back of the classroom to a global advocate for neurodiversity, his life had been shaped by both challenges and triumphs. What had started as a personal struggle had blossomed into a movement that changed the lives of millions. Sitting in his modest home, surrounded by photos of his family and mementos from the countless events he had attended, Liam felt a deep sense of gratitude. His children, Emma and Daniel, had grown into remarkable individuals, each carrying forward his vision in their unique ways. Emma's work as a teacher had revolutionized how neurodiverse students were supported in schools, and Daniel's policy initiatives had reshaped educational systems worldwide. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emma shared exciting news. "Dad," she said, her eyes sparkling, "we're opening a new school next year. It's going to be fully inclusive, with programs specifically designed for neurodiverse students. And we're naming it the Liam Bennett Academy." Liam looked at her, his eyes welling with tears. "The Liam Bennett Academy," he repeated softly. "That's incredible," Daniel chimed in, grinning. "It's about time you had something named after you. You've earned it." Liam chuckled, his heart swelling with pride. "I didn't do any of this alone," he said. "It's always been about the people who believed in the mission." Emma placed a hand on his. "You started it, Dad. You showed us what was possible. This is your legacy." As the years passed, Liam began to step back from his public role, trusting the next generation to carry the torch. He spent more time with his family, enjoying the simple pleasures of life, a morning walk, a good book, a lively dinner with loved ones. Yet, even in retirement, his impact was felt far and wide. One day, as Liam sat in the park near his home, he was approached by a young woman holding a notebook. She looked nervous but determined as she introduced herself. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you. Your work changed my life. I'm a teacher now, and every day, I try to follow the principles you taught us." Liam smiled warmly. "Thank you," he said. "Hearing that means more to me than you know." The woman hesitated, then held out her notebook. "I've been working on a book about teaching neurodiverse students. It's inspired by your methods. Would you mind looking at it?" Liam took the notebook, flipping through its pages. As he read, he felt a familiar sense of hope and purpose. "This is excellent," he said. You're going to make a big difference? The woman beamed, her nervousness replaced by gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'll never forget this. As she walked away, Liam leaned back on the bench, his thoughts drifting. He had always believed that his work wasn't about him. It was about creating a ripple effect, empowering others to continue the mission. And in moments like this, he saw those ripples in action. The opening of the Liam Bennett Academy was a landmark event, attended by educators, policymakers, and families from around the world. The state-of-the-art school was designed with inclusivity at its core, featuring sensory-friendly classrooms, individualized learning plans, and resources to support students of all abilities. Liam, now in his late 70s, was the guest of honor at the opening ceremony. As he stood before the crowd, he felt a mix of humility and awe. The journey that had started with his own struggles had led to this, a place where students like him could thrive without fear of judgment. Welcome to the Liam Bennett Academy, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his chest. This school represents everything we've worked for, a world where every child is valued, where differences are celebrated, and where no one is left behind. He paused, looking out at the crowd. When I was a boy, I didn't think I had a place in the world. But people believed in me. They saw my potential even when I couldn't see it myself. This academy is a testament to what happens when we believe in each other. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Liam stepped back, his heart full. He knew that the work would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by the countless people who had been touched by his vision. Years later, as Liam's health began to decline, he spent his days surrounded by family and friends. Despite the physical limitations of old age, his mind remained sharp, and he continued to offer guidance and support to those who sought his wisdom. One afternoon, as he sat by the window overlooking the garden, Daniel joined him with a stack of letters. "Dad," he said, "we've been getting messages from people all over the world. Students, teachers, parents. They all want to thank you." Daniel handed him one of the letters, and Liam read it slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "Dear Mr. Bennett, I was one of the first students at the Liam Bennett Academy. Before I came to the school, I felt invisible. But at the academy, I found my voice. I'm now studying to become a lawyer, and I hope to one day advocate for others like me. Thank you for everything you've done. You changed my life." Liam set the letter down, his eyes glistening. "It's not just me," he said quietly. "It's all of us working together." Daniel nodded, his respect for his father evident. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined, Dad. The world is better because of you." When Liam passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88, the world mourned the loss of a visionary. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, honoring the man who had turned his struggles into a movement that reshaped education and society. The Liam Bennett Foundation established an annual award in his name, recognizing individuals who demonstrated exceptional commitment to inclusivity and advocacy. Each recipient carried forward Liam's legacy, ensuring that his vision continued to thrive. In classrooms, homes, and communities, Liam's story remained a source of inspiration. His journey from a quiet, misunderstood boy to a global leader was a reminder that greatness often arises from adversity, and that one person's courage can ignite a revolution. And so, Liam Bennett's name became synonymous with hope, resilience, and the belief that every voice matters. His life was a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of growth, and the enduring truth that when we see the value in others, we create a world where everyone can thrive.